very loose, it was not very tight, and it sounded like you had never rehearsed the song.
Sounds about right.
We had two obvious songs. The Vandals had just basically at that time we had two songs, Pat Brown and Urban Struggle. And Urban Struggle starts off with a Sergio Leone ripoff, basically, and they agonized over it, and they decided to just use it in the film, and it's been in that film and on the soundtrack. And Sergio never got mad about it, and he recently passed away this year, and he just let it go. I'm sure he was aware of it too, like in my dreams. But yeah, we just had they were the obvious songs.
Well, Sergio's last comment before he closed his eyes was, that damn Vandals band, damn, I wish I would have had the opportunity to see them.
Keith's probably right. You know, I'm selling myself short. But I will tell you one thing that I don't know if you guys would get to, that the band, that Penelope picked Tia Sewell. You remember this story? She picked DI, and she said, okay, these are my favorite bands. I love these bands. And then the cast got to vote on the third band. So the cast voted, and we got chosen by the cast. And
who else was in the running?
Who else was in the running?
I think that's not the way I heard it.
Jefferson Starship, I think was. Or Jeff, you can tell your story. I don't think. Yeah.
No. Oh, you want the mic back?
I was gonna. You have a story.
The story I heard.
All right. Go. No. I was just going to say, we said we wouldn't do it unless the Vandals got to play. So that's how it happened.
Thank you. So speaking of music, Greg, earlier you were talking a little bit about how this film actually led to a collaboration in later films on some scoring. So could you talk a little bit about that?
Well, Alex Gibson did the music for Suburbia, and he was in a band called Bee People. And I didn't know him, but I thought, wow, that's really cool that he did the music. And he's just a guy from a band. So that was actually, being in Suburbia and seeing that whole process unfold was really inspiring to me. And I do that for a living now. I score films. And Alex and I wound up becoming friends and scoring some films together. And he won an Academy Award as a music editor for Dunkirk a few years ago. So we have an Academy Award winner in our Suburbia world. So. Yeah, well, no, I have nothing to plug right now.
So given that you, of course, are all real-life musicians and not just in the movies, and you know what that scene was like at the time yourselves, how well do you feel like the film approximated that scene, and especially during those live concert sequences in the club on Sunset, as you were telling me?
It was all right. I mean, I was kind of embarrassed, actually. I had a question. I wonder if anyone on this, did any of us get paid for doing this movie?
Yeah, I've got a couple $100 or something.
A couple hundred. That's what they make.
And a couple $100 for the soundtrack.
Right. And my biggest complaint is, when this movie come out, 83? So 80, I can't do the math on that. But I always get kids coming up to me and they go, wow, you got fat and old. It's like, dude, so did your mother. It's been 30 years, guy. Why don't you just, sorry about that. All right, I'm going to pass this out.
Well, yeah, it's hard to tell at those things because even though it's a lot of kids at a sort of fake show, it's not really a show. So you just get up there and play, you know. But it was a bunch of kids that would normally be at those punk shows anyway, so except that they all cut every 5 minutes. You know what I mean? It's not that realistic in that way, but it was fun. It was a fun thing to do for sure. I was 18 years old. And I was just, it was like, wow, okay, we're gonna go do a movie. But yeah, I don't remember getting any money for it.
So Keith, I think you can actually talk to us a little bit about this. It's not just about the music end of the scene. It also comes down to how people are living within that scene, and we see the whole sort of flophouse lifestyle play out in the film. Would you tell us a little bit about what that might have been like at the time, from personal experience or otherwise?
My first experience, and I'm not in the movie, but Lyric brought up the fact that I was asked to be in the movie, but I was explaining to all of my friends here that at that time I was a complete, utter utter mess. I was suffering from the bubonic plague, and I was completely buried in white powder, Hollywood happy powder. So I don't remember being asked to be in the film, and of course I was never paid for being in the film. And getting back to their flop house, at that time they were getting ready to knock down a bunch of houses to build the I want to say is it the one that goes to the LAX. They had started boarding the Century. It wasn't Century though. Century. The 105, okay. From here to LAX, okay. And what they had done was they had started purchasing all of these properties. They started boarding them up because they were going to tear all of them down. And so they lucked out into finding a great scenario to live in, the runaways and the castaways and what have yous. But there were also these Mark Stern, who is one of our favorite punk rock characters, had a punk rock house, I guess over on Wilton, somewhere in the heart of Hollywood. There was also Skinhead Manor. There was the Oxford House. I lived in a beach house with a couple of friends who we would go on to become Black Flag, and so we were kind of flopping in this big room, and there were people coming and going downstairs and sleeping in the shower stalls, and so these scenarios weren't that uncommon. You go to any major city and there would always be like the one guy that had the really good paying job, and it's like, well, all my friends can live here as long as you've got beer and you've got drugs, and you know, we can keep the party going 24 hours. And like I said, that whole strip that leads to LAX, Hawthorne, Inglewood, Compton, they just buy up all of these properties like pennies on the dollar, if that, boarded them up, and they just sat there for like 2 or 3 years, 4 years. So it made perfect sense for them to move into one of these free spaces.
So obviously we all know that this film has quite a lot to do with the sort of coming of age narrative, right? So this is all about kids and teenagers essentially, and you guys yourselves were really young at the time. So I'm curious, how does it feel for you guys being grown-ups now, looking back at what you were doing a few decades ago? Like, how does that perspective change for you about some of the things that happen in the film or some things you maybe experienced in real life? And I'll pass this to you, Joe, on the end.
Well, I just thought, like, this was never going to stop. You know, like, your band's got songs on K-Rock and you're in movies, and it's just never going to stop. And it's kind of a false thing to bank on. But at the time, super fun. And then as I look back on it, I can't believe I was in a Roger Corman movie. You know, that's just something that I wouldn't mind on my grave. This guy was in a Roger Corman movie. I love his movies, and later I began to be like kind of a student of his movies and movies like them. So I'm just happy to be there. And then I was in another Penelope Spheris movie right after this called Dudes. Also a movie she didn't choose the Vandals to be in. She had 2 movies she did not choose the Vandals in that we were in the script to that one. So, but all in all, I mean, look what we're doing now. It's pretty awesome. So.
I'll say a little something about that. I'm really just gratitude because, I mean, aside from Todd, our drummer who passed away, the 4 of us in TSOL still play music together. I mean, that's something I didn't expect to happen. So 40 years later, almost, to be able to, you know, do that, and to also just be friends with these guys for all this time. I mean, it's crazy to you know, and a lot of people in the audience, like we've all been together in this thing for a really long time, and I'd never expected that to happen. You know, it was all fun at the time, but it's like, wow, to have, you know, it's nice to, it's a really nice reward to have a little longevity from stuff like that seemed so tenuous, you know, at the time.
So another thing the film talks quite a lot about is that outside of the main characters' lives, there are bigger world events going on, and you see that reflected in the style of the film, in some of the dialogue even. Some of the style especially is reminiscent of the recent war in Vietnam. This is the Cold War era. For you guys in making music, to what extent is that a sort of conscious interaction with those bigger ongoing events like that, which we have many of today, of course? That's a tough one. Oh, I gave you a tough one.
Well, it's not a tough one. No one wants to answer. Yeah, I don't know. Does it? You know, a lot of these events these days, I stay away from them. I just stay away. I don't want to. You know, okay, playing punk rock back then, like if I never once got a letter from a kid calling me a commie scumbag because I said the president should shove it, right? I never want, but these days, you know, I was getting letters from punk rock kids calling me a communist, and anyway, whatever. And you know, so it's a little rough. I stay out all that, and I'm sad that Penelope's not here because I owe her an apology. So if you stick around to watch the film, while we're on stage, you'll see me going like this, saying "cut." I'm actually telling them to cut the film. That's what I'm doing. My ego was so out of control that basically there might be a director there, but it's me right now. So, and it's so funny, she actually left that in the film, and I feel so bad about it, and it's so embarrassing. And every time I watch that, I see me telling them to cut. And anyway, a little out of control. All right, but I've got it together now.
Like you know, we were writing songs about diarrhea and sandwiches in those days, and that's about all we ever did. So we didn't. If anything, I think Jack will back me up on this. We were, if there was a social movement, we were kind of ruining it, like for everybody else. We were bad at parties. We were bad kids, and we were just having fun, and you know. So I guess we didn't. We weren't focused on the world. We were focused on what are we going to do. Jack's going to come and pick us up in his cult wagon. He's going to take us to a party, and we're going to wreck the place. That's what we did back then. Am I right?
Yeah. I mean, I lived with my mother and my father. You know what I'm saying? I wasn't paying taxes. I didn't have a job. You know, if I got money, I'd buy surfboards. There wasn't like a lot of, and I laugh because sometimes I hear like these punks talk about how big they were on all these social issues. Like, are you kidding me, man? It's like I didn't vote. Whatever. That's just the way it was. I didn't have a lot of concerns back then. Other than, like Joey said, wrecking a house. I'm the best at wrecking a house. You've never seen anybody. And I always tell kids, so if you want to wreck a house and you don't want to get like totally involved in it, this is what I will recommend. If you go to the next party you go to, butter the floor in front of the refrigerator. It's the best money that you get. One small pat of butter and you'll be laughing all evening long, man. Because people come in their high heels to go get a cold beer and they just go down. And, you know, and sometimes you got to fight your way out of the house, but, you know, it is exciting. That's all.
I will be doing that, definitely, when I get home with my roommates. I have one more question for you, and then I think maybe we'll turn it over if some people in the crowd have some quick ones. But I'm going to ask you a cliche question, which is that a lot of the kids in the film, you see them discovering punk rock or this punk scene for the first time. Do any of you have a real distinct memory or a moment from a time that you felt like this is really something going on, and that turned out to be this whole movement that we're talking about tonight?
Well, yeah, I mean, just when you start hearing these cool bands and going, I mean, the first show I ever went to was the Plugs and the Adolescents, and the crowd, and it was just mind-blowing because, I mean, you know, I'd heard of these bands and heard some records and listened to Rodney on the Rock and all that, but when you go to a punk show and you're like, oh my, you know, I'm a 15-year-old kid watching these bands play, I mean, it was like a whole new thing at that time, you know. But the cool thing too is that, like, we play shows and there's 15-year-old kids that are just discovering this now, so it's that kind of moment of discovery when you get to see bands, you know. So it still is happening, but it was really magical when I first got to go to shows. So
yeah, and Greg should have said one. So Greg's kids playing fiddler, and the cool thing about it was when we played Coachella, Greg's son actually played drums for us when we played Coachella, and it was great to have Max, because Max, since a little baby, and then to have him playing with us was cool. But I was in high school when I like saw my first punk, and I was tripping because it was this kid, and I'd known him since Cub Scouts. I'd known this kid, and he wasn't cool, and he was picked on a lot, and I was like a surfer, you know, troublemaker, cool kid, real tight-assed about the way I looked. And this kid shows up with a really bad haircut, like a punishment haircut, you know what I'm saying? And on his shirt said, I'm an alien or something, and I'm thinking, fuck, you're already fucked, dude. You should stop now, man. This is, oh, sorry about the language. We're in a shopping center. Anyway. But and then some football guy turned around and was picking on this kid, and I stood up for him. But that was the first time, like for me, I was fascinated that this picked on kid would look like that. And then shortly afterwards, I shaved my head, and I was in. So
I worked in record stores, so I grew up with prog rock. Luckily, glam rock came along. Always loved the Beatles, always loved the Rolling Stones, but was always listening for something new. And when the Ramones happened, when the New York Dolls happened, when I heard the MC5 and Iggy and the Stooges, I remember purchasing the Buzzcocks' first album up at Music Plus on PCH in Hermosa Beach. That's when it all started to change for me. And everything else just kind of like organically moved along, and everything just fell into place. I find myself at a Journey concert with Thin Lizzy playing along with them, and I'm sandwiched in between two like centers that could have played on the LA Lakers, Greg Ginn, and the guy that I worked for in the record store. And we just got through listening to Thin Lizzy, and Greg Ginn looks at me, and it's like the light bulb is going on over his head. Like, I got a handful of songs. Let's go to my living room and I'll play them for you. And everything else after that was just the flow of the universe.
I have a very specific moment when I heard about punk rock, and it was at summer camp in 1978, and some kid was telling the story about having a punk rock day every Wednesday at Beverly Hills High School, where this band called the Snot Puppies would play, and you would throw food on them, and they liked it. And I go, so that's punk rock? And he goes, yeah, that's punk rock. And so I got on the phone, I asked my brother, I go, what? Do you know anyone that is into punk rock? And he goes, two things. Steve Olson lives in the neighborhood. Here's a pro skater. He's all into it. He'll tell you everything about it. And you own a punk rock record, because remember when I gave you that Ramones record that I didn't like? So you're got a head start. So I came home and I was instantly punk rock. But you had to get this haircut first, the crop thing. I didn't get, and that took a while. It took a lot of guts, but eventually I got it.
Alrighty. Does anyone in this crowd have something burning that they would like to ask these four gentlemen? I think I'm only going to take about 2 or 3. So let's put some hands up, and I can make some choices. Yes. How about, the one that just yelled. One more time.
Do you like kids?
Do you like kids? Do you like kids, gentlemen? Oh, Kiss. Excellent question. Do we like Kiss, gentlemen?
I'm not really. I mean, I appreciate them. They look cool, but you know, it wasn't ever my bag because I sort of actually I kind of thought like Kiss was sort of a lower level rock band. Like I was into Zeppelin and stuff like that. But like Keith was saying, I was into prog rock too, and you know, I'm like they don't really matter, you know, like the Stones, and you're like. But then it's like when the Buzzcocks and the Damned and Pistols and I mean those, but the Damned particularly, like when I hear those bands, it's like it's all out the window. Stranglers, it's like you can't. Stranglers or ELO, it's like, well, come on, you know. So that's my comment on this.
All right, I do got a Gene Simmons story if you want to hear a Gene Simmons story. Although my tongue is longer than Gene's tongue in real life, but I met this. So Gene Simmons, you know, the Boots and the Kiss and the Killer and I'm Coming Killer. And when I'm a kid watching that stuff, right, like going, oh wow, this is like real. I thought it was real, and then I'm in this studio, and Gene Simmons and Paul Stanley walk in, and I'm like stoked, right? And I see him, and they got this really pretty woman with them, and the guy that I was with knew him. So he goes, hey, Gene, do you know Jack? So I go to shake his hand, and his handshake was like a little soft powder puff handshake. And I go to grab his hand, and I recoiled. And I go, oh, come on, dude, man. And I looked at, because, you know, it was supposed to be the Killer. And anyway, so it was a terrible moment for me. And the one thing I do like about punk rock is none of these people were fooling. They weren't acting. There was one or two bands that were acting, but most of them were really exactly as messed up as your records show. They were really, when you get by them, they were really not well people. And I really enjoyed the honesty of that.
My story doesn't come close to yours. I met him backstage at one of the Ringling Sisters benefits for the Holly Crest Orphanage, and he seemed like a pretty decent guy. But my Kiss story, and I've seen Kiss 3 times. I saw their first live performance on the West Coast. They played at the Long Beach Auditorium, and it was pretty mind-numbingly boring, but I had a Kiss poster on my wall. My dad came in one day and said, "You're a fag."
Let's go to the next question.
Yeah, no shit.
Okay, this gentleman has a question. This gentleman right here, yeah, yell it out. Yes.
Oh shit, fuck yeah, I love circle jerks. No, that's my question. Since there's not that many black punk rockers on the rise, you guys think you can have a band on Instagram, Los Knowledge?
Is that a question?
Yeah, and I got a fan for Keith Morris or Jack Richard.
All right.
I want to give it to
What about Joe Escalante?
No pin for Joe, apparently.
I don't know, I want to give it to one of you guys, whoever gets it first.
Keith likes pins.
Okay, Keith. I'm gonna give it to him. I really love you, dude. I really do.
There we go. Thank you.
Scaring them.
All right, we'll take one more, and it's going to be the last one, so let's make it a good one, yeah? Anybody?
How about stories about El Duce?
Excuse me, one more time.
Anybody got stories about El Duce?
Stories about El Duce.
Yes, I actually kicked him into a urinal one evening. He was urinating, and I came up behind him and just put a boot in his back and kicked him into a urinal. It's an excellent story for this afternoon. He did not take offense. That's
Sounds like
right.
something you would like.
I think Keith has a story.
Yes.
Were you in this movie, Keith?
I was asked to be in this movie, Jack. Okay, getting back to El Duce. The guy presented himself as a drunken idiot, but he was smart enough to be in a band with Tomato Duplante from the Screamers. And Tomato Duplante would not just surround himself with idiots. So, like I said, El Duce was just a drunken doofus. But He was also an extremely intelligent person. He didn't present himself that way.
All right, well, lucky for us, we are able to have this screening outdoors tonight so everyone can stay right where they are. And I'd like to thank you guys again so much for being here, for talking to us. Let's do one more round of applause and we'll get started. Thanks, guys.
Oh, cool. Okay. That concludes.